Wholeness and balanced vibration to everyone. Today is May the 29th. You have tuned into the Esoteric Radio show and our segment of the Activated Body Show, which is the ER room for your soul. Today we're going to get into quite a few things. I just wanted to say my co-host is off for today, but we'll be returning in 2 weeks for another Activated Body Show, and of course you can catch up with us next week on my show, which is just the Esoteric Radio show. I also want to let those that are just listeners know that we're available at www.resistance2010.com for all your needs. And so we're going to get right into this today. Today's show is really geared around the connectedness and the different spirits and things that exist on our planetary and universal fields, and how to identify those spirits and where they exist, because we've discovered through a fractal and through fractalization that there's multiple levels of how we're all connected, meaning that if you go inside, you can find all the planets, you can find all of the beings, you can find many different things, and it is us choosing to amplify that's making that present in our external world. But we are internal and external beings. We have an ebb and a flow, somewhat of a dualistic nature, which allows us to exist in two different worlds, which is personally the dream reality, or as we know it as, or meditative states, and the waking reality. So today what we wanted to talk about is we wanted to talk about the difference between the soul and the spirit, because from my understanding now, I've seen that when people begin to look into spirituality, they begin to use the same terms. But if you go into the deeper levels of spirituality, we find that there's a separate term for everything. Like looking at Sanskrit, they have a word for every single state that one could enter into. It's not just, or they have different names for different beings. Like we use the term God as a universal term, even though that is particular to one Gothic being, but we use that as a particular term to determine all there is, or the Most High, or God. But that is not correct. And what we're learning now is how to differentiate as we become more spiritually advanced. We learn how to differentiate one essence from another so that we can choose what type of balance that we want to have that will allow us to be more effective in what we are doing. So I also wanted to talk about basically that the soul, the only differentiation between the soul and the spirit is the soul happens to be in a process where it is in another womb phase, whether it's inside of a body, whether it's inside of a planet, etc., and it's about to learn a lesson. It's a new lesson that it has to learn. While the spirit is already intelligible about not only what the soul would need to learn, but many other things. And so the whole relationship with a soul and a spirit is lessons and abilities and teaching. And this is something that is going on with us as humans, and I will call it more forcefully, like you have to force feed a baby. And to get into that deeper, I'll have to explain first, for many of us that feel like we have an origin out in the cosmos and we may have crash landed on Earth for supplies or something of that nature and then got trapped. Let's just explain exactly what's going on between you coming into a planet like Earth. So generally when a spirit moves in a straight line, we uncovered that in a lot of the ancient texts. It talks about the way spirits move, and they move in a straight line because they're more like rays. They pierce. And so that's what actually gives us the word spiritual. If you look at it, it just says the spear ritual. And what the spiritual or the spear ritual was about is just as we uncovered that you can hook a fish, and spirits are just known as fish, you can also spear a fish. And this is basically when the influence of celestial bodies, stars, rays, lights affect an orb or a soul-type being. It spears right through their orb. So we see right then from that action that it would be very difficult to prevent something like that from happening to you unless you gain the knowledge and the accessibility to go into deeper reaches of the earth where light cannot penetrate, or only certain types of light can penetrate. So we understand directly that being on the surface of a planet leaves us extremely exposed to spirits. And so we will go on from there. What literally happens to, in this case, you become the spirit if you're outside of a planet. You're the spirit traveling through the universe, etc., and you're about to make entry. So you become this straight line about to make entry into this orb. But what's most important is the orb that you're about to enter has to make sure that you're compatible with it. So and it takes time to mold you or to heat you up so that you become malleable. Because your beginning state is more like a mineral. Like if you look at many of the stones and rocks that come from space, it's more like a mineral and a metal. It's very cooked and solid. So it's very firm. It knows what it is. But in order to learn the earth lesson, you have to breach these atmospheres. And these atmospheres, as we discovered that atmosphere, there was something about fear that had to do with atmosphere. But it really was that the atmosphere is responsible for putting fear in you. And let's explain that. If you can notice that when a baby comes out, a baby is fearless. This is the beginning process of the spirit entering into the atmosphere. It is fearless. Then what happens over a succession of things, and we call that life, over a succession of things happening, fears begin to be created, and boundaries and rules begin to be created. So this is what happens when the spirit is coming into the atmosphere of Earth. There's multiple beings in charge of roughing the spirit up to make sure that when it finally lands on the surface of the planet, that it actually is ready to learn lessons because, in essence, it cannot defend itself. All of its powers and abilities have been stripped away from it. And this becomes the root of why they explain that in the Bible it says, I can tear it down and build it back up again. What this is about is a process that some have chosen to go through to make themselves more strong, more fortified, more upgraded, and more protected. Now, if we look at the word protection, we see all it says is professional technology. And I started to examine Earth and how many things were just protecting and needed protection. And so in getting deeper into it, I realized that protection is allowing a being to go through its process of learning and teaching without being interrupted by something else that cares nothing for that process. It just needs to fulfill another desire of itself, which is to consume and to eat. And those beings have to exist too, and they have their place and they have their purpose. So what I started to understand is that that's why you didn't see all these human beings running around with all the power, because what happens is the spirits are responsible for teaching human beings what that power is about, how to use that power, etc. And they do that through lessons. So a person is started with basic power and abilities, which is what we call the five senses. But that was last week's show. We'll go a little bit further and talk about when the spirits and beings and controllers start to trust you with more gradual power, like deeper knowledge, wisdom. What do you do with it? And generally it's wisdom and knowledge first, because wisdom and knowledge at first is not that dangerous in the essence of it still takes action. Meaning that you can give a person the knowledge of how to even build a bomb, but the action of the person even doing that and going that far is still much more than just the knowledge itself. So what happens is most people are still on the preliminary lessons of being tried and tested to what they're going to do with the knowledge and information. Are they going to reign over others with it and make like they can't give you the knowledge and the secrets about everything, and they just want to use that and charge you for it even? Or are they good teachers and going to show you by example exactly how to utilize the knowledge? Because that's where things begin. So the next level that begins after that is that these things start to turn on, your sixth sense, I guess. And I talked about last week how the sixth sense and that number 6 really corresponds to your beginning, your root chakra activation, and your fire starts to turn on again, so you can start basically your body becomes malleable. So when the root chakra turns on, the fire from the Kundalini begins to heat up the rest of the spheres and the bodies and the organs, etc., it starts to get them excited and get them ready to, it's like, okay, we're active again. And it's interesting because we can also apply this many times to the concepts of things like crystals. When they heat up, they start to release their essence, and when they're really cold, it starts to contract. But basically, this sixth sense turns on this ability for you to begin to attract things on this plane in particular that we're on. And many people, as we talked about, are stuck on the sixth sense because when it turned on for them, all they used it was to attract more people. They got all these people around them, and they have all these people worshiping them, actually causing them to decay on multiple levels. They say at one point the moon was actually brighter and bigger than the sun, but with that, and that's why in the ancient cultures everyone seems to be worshiping the moon, because it was the primary celestial body that could be viewed from Earth. But over time, with so many people demanding things and so many people pulling energy from the moon, it lost its light, allowing the sun to become brighter, and then people went to worshiping the sun. So if you notice, this is the same behavior that most people have with even other beings and humans that are in their direct vicinity. When they can use them, and there's something they have, then they make a lot of interactions with that individual, and they do a lot of trading and helping with that individual. But then, if that individual loses their light or shine, they're off to another celestial body, celestial individual. So this becomes very important to understand, because what we now get a chance to do is examine exactly what's happening here on the planet with the controllers and the Illuminati and all that stuff from our own standpoint, from the standpoint of how we are involved in all of that also. How we have just been stuck in a cycle of pointing the finger and blaming everyone externally without looking internally and saying, hey, I'm doing definitely my own 1 billionth or 7 billionth of a share of everything that's happening here on a dynamic level. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to clear up many things so that people have access to the higher essences, the higher abilities. And that comes with first being trusted with their first abilities and talents and using those properly. Getting involved in this universal mission. Some people see themselves on ships and in space and meeting foreign beings. That's all on Earth. You're in a ship, that's called your body. There's many foreign beings here, and there's lots of space stuff going on here. And so this is where the mission really began. But it also shows that if you don't want to begin the mission here, then you're never going to begin the mission out in space or anywhere else, because there's no such thing. It's all about what you're doing right now, what kind of alchemy you're working on your soul. So what also goes on with this spiritual contact with souls is the spirit is their teacher. So it has a certain amount of time to do that. It knows exactly what criteria to look for, and it knows exactly when to leave. And many individuals here on Earth have been guided, as they talk about, you have spiritual guides, have been guided by spirits and been taught certain things and been given lessons. Unfortunately, if the soul continues to fail those lessons and fail to learn those abilities that are being taught, meaning that for a moment while the spirit may be in you, let's just get very clear here. The spirit enters you and the spirit has the ability to read minds. It's the spirit reading the mind, and then the spirit comes back to your soul and explains to your soul, or better like words, here's what's in that person's mind. At that point, the soul should get the inclination that, hey, we can read minds. So from that point, the soul makes an endeavor to attempt to learn the ability of how to read minds, in which the spirit showed them how to do that and showed them that that could be done. Some people, however, especially with the gods and the religion, have utilized the one particular entity to do all of their looking into the future and pushing up positive energy and doing all of this stuff. So they've been counting on this particular spirit to do all this. But the spirit has an agreement to leave at a certain point. And if the person has not learned the lesson, then when the spirit leaves, they return to the debased state that they were in before the spirit came in contact with them. And this is why in the darker societies they believe that God left this planet. It's because they had a contact with God, quote unquote, in an attempt to teach them a lesson, and they didn't learn that lesson. And then it left them. And then they have to wait all the way to the time again, if that, whenever that comes, to begin to rebuild again. Because it's just like anything. If you are a spirit and you're very advanced and you're into building souls, and you go in to build a soul and it keeps falling down, it's only going to be a matter of time before you go and you work on another soul, because it's similar to bees alighting flowers, because earth itself is still a plant. And so these rays and these spirits send their essence and their lessons and their everything to the souls that are here, and they have a certain period of time to develop. And the ones that don't develop are converted into the actual soil, for better lack of words, of what makes things grow, until they begin to go all the way out the other side and purify themselves through crystals, and the essences begin to return because they're actually being burned up as they enter into the center of the earth in strata. So it appears that this is a grand strategy of creation. Some people say, well, I think it's very negative and evil and things of that nature to kill. And then if you ask that individual, well, nature does kill, is that okay? They'll say, yeah, nature is allowed to kill because that's nature. The fact is that these people are very confused and are separating two things that are the same thing. The cycles here are life and death, life and death. We have lessons here to learn from Earth, and then we have other celestial bodies such as Earth and more advanced to continue to learn our lessons. For those who feel like they just want to be Earth, now that's another thing that's gone on here with planet worship and things. Some people feel like they want to be Mars, they want to be Saturn, they want to be these deities that do correspond to the planets. They should not be surprised if they end up stuck on that planet, and that's where they spend out a larger part of their existence continuously learning lessons. Some are more apt pupils and capable of going through the whole university, learning from every single celestial body and going and graduating from that into other things. Now, all the tools that are necessary to accomplish this have been given to you on the Resistance site, because there is still something about the self-faults, because the covenants here were made by faults. And let's talk about the covenants really briefly. Covenants are basically when the celestial bodies or the watchers made agreements to what they would do for all of the souls that entered into these universes. And during each procession, one rules, meaning that their essence is the strongest. But it doesn't mean the other ones are gone at all. They're just waiting for their particular moment to give the lesson. And so, in essence, this makes the joke kind of on man and woman about us being able to affect the planets and what they're doing and how they're doing it. That was never the goal. The fact is that you were already made to submit when you came into the celestial field of Earth and hit the ground, and then came out as a plant in a fivefold shape, like you see a papaya, or that could be your papa there, or papaya. All these words do mean something, and they are energies, and they are very powerful. How many papaya trees are on the planet? And so it's only because we've been looking at things the wrong way, because we haven't learned all of our lessons, that we're so confused. And then it comes a time for people to release the confusion, and that becomes your universal mission on this planet, is to walk around the planet as if you have like the rod of Hermes, and you have your self-faults, and you begin to do your work on individuals, healing them, like a real crystal Christ should. And then they're always watching. So after you do enough of that, because that's action, that's where it all counts at, then the next ability is given. Your palms start to tingle, and then you could just touch them. You don't even have to go through the self-salt situation. I noticed there was a quote on the website just recently about, the salts are not needed, blah, 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 blah. I'm more than sure they're not needed before you've been made to submit. But after that, everything has to be learned again. That's why you come here like you have amnesia, because something did not go like your lesson. And that's what needs to be understood by us. It only could be one or two things. Either we said, hey, I can go back in again and build this one even better. Or when we went in and we came out, there was still an imbalance and it wasn't going to work. So sent in again. And they say here, according to Velikovsky's work, that there's been 7 Earths. And they're still here, all in layers of our strata. And they're each responsible for teaching the lessons. So I'm going to take a moment here to recap on some of my notes. I should start making these shows like 30 minutes or 15 minutes because I can pretty much get out everything that I need to say in that short period of time, and then people can look back over it and see the depth within what's really being explained. But the fact is that we have 45 minutes, so we'll just keep going. The rise of intelligence on this planet and the rise of the population does make it more strenuous on the controllers to keep things managed. And this becomes the 0 point, or what they call the 0 point sounds to me like zero tolerance. It sounds like the point in when they say, okay, that's it. No more mistakes. We can't handle any mistakes out of you anymore because you're too powerful. And your mistakes are actually ricocheting over to so many souls. We have no choice but to take you out of the game. And so we see that in many cases, that in the past that was happening all the time. Like there were certain people that you would see come in and come out. They were only allowed to be on the planet for a certain period of time because of their level of power and level of ability, intelligence, etc. They would say, well, they always kill those people. They are good people. But the fact is that the growth on this planet has already been deemed to go at the speed of how fast the planet is spinning. That way, it doesn't throw everyone off or basically get a person into stuff that they're nowhere near prepared for. Because imagine, if people can't even distinguish now between the soul and the spirit yet, how prepared are they to interact with highly advanced spiritual beings? They're not even ready yet. So it becomes also where you have to ask yourself a question. In these very advanced societies that you have idealized in your mind where everything is working perfectly, what is it that you can contribute to that they don't already have? If it's very advanced, everything that you've thought of, even in your most brilliant epiphanies, are still something that they've already tried and tested and may be operating. So the fact is, the only position that you can have in any more advanced community, society, mind, etc., would be in service. You would be doing something. And it seems to me that your job would be to take care of plants. And if you got high enough, you could get to a level where you would take care of planets. But if you were still a plant, you would definitely not be on that level. So people understand what I'm saying. Are you a plant that still needs to be taken care of? Or are you in charge of taking care of planets? This is how you look at it in the fractal of where you're rising in this whole thing. Now, some are lost. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the non-activated symptoms. Now, the only thing non-activation is it's actually an incubation phase of sleep in which most of the essences that have been collected within the body are tired and exhausted, and they are actually sleeping. And the symptoms of this is looping, meaning that there's a continuous repetition of the same things over and over and over again, as if the spirit or the soul may not even be awake or may not even be there, and the body has taken control and it's simply reciting what's in its brain. Non-interest in the soul, these are symptoms of non-activated bodies. Non-interest in the soul. The person cares none whatsoever of the animal body, which is the composition of animal, plant, and spirit, which we call the animal body. The animal body has no inclination to the spirit's not even home. Like I say, the light's on, but nobody's home. There's no light inside of the body, so there's no interest in the soul because the actual animal body has yet to even learn that lesson. So also notice, the spirit or the soul comes in, the spirit and the soul comes in teaching animals also. And this is something that, again, that I saw on this Star Wars game where they pulled up into the planetary sphere and they did a quick scan and it says, the organic life here seems to be way more advanced for the point in time they're in. Must be Jedi involved. Meaning that something's going on with this particular planet where the flora and the fauna are way more advanced and intelligent than they should be for this particular time. And that's because spirits have the ability, in this case they're being called Jedi, which is an Egyptian term, have the ability to take plants and morph them into, and basically awake them. Like we talked about, you could play frequency to a tree in an experiment that they did, and the tree came alive and started to dance. So there was really a difference between the tree that you're looking at outside right now and how it is versus what the tree really is capable of doing. It's just dormant on this particular dimension. So, stuck on one religion. This is the non-activated symptom. Because, again, the animal body is running majority of the thought. If for a particular moment the person had a spiritual contact, which is generally in a church or religion, and this gets a lot deeper into what happens when people go into churches and mosques and things, and then they decide not to have that as a part of their life anymore. When you go into a church, as they say, it's psionically controlled, so there's definitely beings and thoughts and spirits and forms and essences and everything there. And they're definitely going to penetrate with the rays and the crosses and the horns and the thorns and everything they can to get into the person's orb. But if for some reason it just doesn't work out and the person decides to leave, then generally that spirit leaves them. But it does leave them with all the lessons that they learn while in that temple, that mosque, etc. And so generally, even though that person may not be following any of the rules that are dictated in that religion anymore because they left, they're still reciting the religion over and over again and stuck on that one religion because it's the only spiritual contact and lesson that their soul ever learned. So if you ever talk to them about their soul, they immediately go into the religion that they learned. The last thing is the difficulty in thinking and, most importantly, acting. This is the non-activated symptom. What literally happens is that because we're doing alchemy on our own body, we have to decide what essences we're going to put into it. But there are essences in it already, spirits in the body already. Some of them have to be kicked out. It's just like a habit. You have to tell, hey, Hobbit, you got to go. You want the ring too much. You have to be able to govern these intelligences as you walk about your own body as if it's a battlefield. You have to keep everyone in check and in station. Even if you have these planetary bodies, which are your organs, they're playing their sound. Even if you have those in, you're still in mastery. Self-mastery, which is master over the mind, master over the body, master over the soul. When you do that, you become master of the universe. So inside all these guys, Saturn, Mars over here, Nergal, Nin, all these people, these beings, Venus, all of them are under control. They're at service. They're waiting to serve. And you choose, as you walk about the field, which one you need to use at a certain point, because that's why the Kundalini is so moving through the chakras and never stuck on one planet or on one chakra, because certain situations require certain things. So if someone gets out of line on you, you may have to turn on root chakra. If someone is trying to mentally overpower your mind, you may have to turn on crown chakra. So there has been a great confusion in this world, and we need to now understand that we're coming off of that. So much of what is being expressed, like we can now express this visually. For those who understand how to work such things, could even take what I'm saying now and show people visually, this is how it was all put together. And then truth has a way of standing for itself. Once a person's capable of seeing it, just like the book that we just recently posted, Earth Moon, people have been reporting enlightened states after reading the book, or at least even gandering at a couple chapters of the book. And this is because that's the effect of truth. The body, for those that we've already filtered, the resistance is already a filter to individuals who are looking to get involved in advancing their mind, body, and soul. So that filter is really all that's required for something like the book Earth Moon to speak to an individual. As I said, if you just have a little bit of spirit, you can see within other animals and plants and things where their spirits and essences reside. But still understand, there's beings such as Earth and the octopus, as I was just reading about, that contain animal, plant, and mineral, all in the same body. And then I started to think about it, humans do too, because their hair was said to grow like a tree, and they have definitely an animal thing going on, and then they have these minerals that are rocks or stones, even if it's a gallstone and kidney stones, growing within the body, and so this makes them all of that. So let us start being very clear these days about what we're talking about when we're saying about other energies doing different things to us, and I don't want to handle this anymore. Still, as we were talking about earlier, you're being tested with your senses. So I wanted to also talk about, as we get into that, when you turn on these abilities, because the planets have they have their own thing going on, and the universe has its own thing going on, and it actually has a plan to actually turn on everyone. But it's still going to be, because the soul is individual. That's why it's called a soul. That means like alone, by myself, I'm one thing, and then I'm hooked up with all these other guys and all these other gals. So the fact is that this soul is going to turn on, and all those other beings are going to turn on. And then what happens is that everything that you've learned and everything that has been, what this whole thing has been about, is all going to come to play at that one moment. It is the great judgment. Now, the judgment should simply be looked at as like when your test gets graded. It shouldn't be looked at as, the time in which you may, completely be blotted out from the existence. I mean, fear tactics like that have always been used to keep very powerful beings suppressed. We have to still look at what's ultimately gone on through history and seeing the rapid amount of growth that has taken place with humanity, and how much control we really had over that growth. Meaning that you can at times play a short role in the direction that society is going, but anything long term is a collective idea. It's never like if you just have an idea for one race or one kind of people, you're to go sit down and they'll think about that, but it's not something that the universe and the planets want to accept and want to get involved with, meaning secularism. The secular way of looking at things. Now, we still understand now how it's all put together, and I suggest that people take this recording in particular and play it back several times and just listen to it, because in many ways, if you just drop the judging, every time I approach someone, I always have to prove how right I am. Drop that for a moment and actually listen to people who've already talked to these beings before, these higher beings. Meaning that the communication, no matter what you thought, if you were saying something that had already been said before, it's a spiritual contact. You're only in communication with the astral portal, and you're piping it into your environment. That's it. You had nothing to do personally, per se, with the groundwork of how that's put together. You're just kind of carrying the pamphlet. You may have printed it out, but the words and everything on it don't belong to you. And that's when I mean truth. When you're talking truth, truth stands for itself, so it doesn't really come from you. You're just happy to have it, be in possession of it, and while you're passing it to others, continuing to hear its melody in your ears, because it actually makes you happy again. It tunes up your soul. So the main thing is that we want to talk about Club Afterlife. Because I was watching this one digital, I think it was a game or something, and they had a club called Afterlife. And I said, that's so funny, because eventually everyone will go. But Club Afterlife is very animated. And many of us have gotten a chance to peer into Afterlife a little bit and see just how massive it is. And it's way more experience going on there. And we all will eventually get there. That's what's been guaranteed to us. And so regardless of what happens on this planet with all the stuff that's now facing us, you're still going to need to develop your soul in order to fare better in afterlife. Because remember, a lot of people are really concerned about the situation that's taking place here on Earth, and with just cause and real reason to. The fact still is that any of the situations that are taking place on Earth still only have in their worst tenth one effect on you. Meaning it can remove your physical life. After that, there's still something going on. And what you're calling Earth now, you're still going to be on it. So you work now. there is a way better chance that when you enter into it, it'll be in better condition. And that's where this whole thing about Earth has really gotten kicked up on a universal level, and they're inviting many different souls to come in and do something about the situation. It's because everything is still in real time. In essence, you can view here what's personally happening on the larger level. And what's personally happening is there's so many plants, and there's so few farmers and gardeners. And then you got Monsanto seeds, meaning you have seeds that are generated and they only have one idea about what they want from this particular plant, this particular mother, this particular womb. And this is something also to be discussed, because the big issue is that the seeds that are growing up here, the people are actually so secular and so into themselves that they nourish nothing. They only need nourishment. And because it's just, and they may end up as one of these trees on the mountains that there's millions of in Costa Rica, billions of trees and plants and everything like that, because it still makes a difference what you do with the abilities that you've been trusted with. And because you're actually in this humanoid state, which is still very advanced, there's multiple things that are living inside of you. Every time you eat the wrong thing, and every time you say the wrong thing, and every time you do the wrong thing, you're doing that to yourself. And so ultimately, it's like when people get really old, they feel sorry for themselves about all the things they did negative in their life, like the drinking and stuff, because their body is not functioning. But remember, while they were young, they didn't really feel any of that. And so it's important to keep that in mind on how we're handling our spiritual contact here on this planet, is to understand that you can get scarred up. You can get burned. You can get these type of effects from delving and playing around in the wrong things for too long, because it's all alive. The instruction is now here for you, and it's about the close of time, because everything is ready to just disperse. It's ready to, just like any spore, any spore wants to send its essence out into other things to continue to survive. And so it's time for certain beings to be jettisoned from this planet. Certain souls need to be jettisoned into other fields to do more of their, and have more of their existence lessons and the symbiotic relationship that goes along with that. So remember that the spirit comes in for experience and agrees to teach the lesson. And that's the symbiotic relationship that it knows. Like it told me in the beginning. It said, teach. I wasn't the one that said, I'm going to go and be a teacher. There was a voice in my mind that said, now it's time for you to teach. And I said, and this was a while ago, I said, how can I teach something that I know completely about? And it said, you know enough. You'll never know completely all about it. That's the whole thing, just like what we were talking about in the chat box. Your knowledge, your lessons, your teaching give you growth. You never want to stop growing, tree, because it allows you to keep reaching higher and higher and higher. That gets you closer to the essence of what is really driving this whole thing. So it's almost like the top part of a tree is always the most nourished, because it's directly in the face of its nourishment. That's how we need to be on the mental, physical, spiritual level. We have to be directly in front of our nourishment. So you need to either be directly in front of your weights, directly in front of your meditation, directly in front of your food, directly in front of your proper food, your supplements, etc. And so once again, since we have only 4 minutes left in the show, I wanted to talk very briefly about, again, Agar 35 and SIMD allow you to create reference points. It's important to understand a balanced reference point of meditation. Once you actually obtain that, then there's no use for Agar and SIMD after that point. 2, the self-salts allow you to fix grandma, grandpa, and all the rest of the people running around that have diseases. Diseases are spirits. Like, they were trying so hard to cover that up that they've finally done it. But over time, there's always been a notion by the ancients that if you were ill, it was because of some spirit or essence that had attached or hooked itself to you. It happens all the time when you're in the ocean. So to remove that, you have to vibrate at another field in order for it to shake it off. You shake off the shells. So to shake off shells, you have to bring up the frequency, vital, magnetic, and electric. Once you raise your vital, magnetic, and electric energies, they're not compatible. Just like they say, you can't graft the south side of a tree onto the north side of another tree. You have to graft the south side with the south side, or it's not symbiotic enough. So this same type of laws that exist in nature, because there is a large part of our being that is definitely involved in that, it works the same way. So when you vibrate at a higher level, you actually get a chance to turn on things, because things that are too dense to learn that lesson, they fall off. So I'm going to go ahead and conclude the show today by telling everyone that we're having a phenomenal time because we're learning so many things, and we're always willing to share. And I'm personally asking individuals to donate. I know that we do have products, but everyone has to understand that those products are priced the way that they're generally available on the internet. That way, people choose to have the products through us. But what that also causes, there's no real profit margin. The plan is that we have some things to do, and those things can really, really be accomplished, but it does take the fuel. Like they say, the fire or the fuel makes things malleable. So if we want some results out of the reality, we have to put some fire underneath it. And when you put fire under things, it's like when someone gets fired at a job, you're fired. Everything in their life changes from that point. And so it's the same thing with the reality. If we put the energy into it and we let them hear our voice and let them see what we're about and what we're involved in, and we're capable of doing that on a massive level, which we can do through the internet with the proper resources, then it forces things to change the same way that the stars are affecting us. Now, remember, we're stars too, so we have the ability to affect things also, but it's still going to be about how much we shine. And that's what the big secret is about these individuals that you're seeing, like we talked about in front of you, actors, stars, and things of that nature, is that it's the spirits inside of them making them shine. However, the reality still has to be calibrated for people to like that kind of light, for better lack of words. So all the propaganda that's surrounded by dealing drugs and things like that makes the light of a spiritual being that's super amplified on that, like Jay-Z or whoever, it makes that, that's the kind of light, in essence, I need to eat. So this reality is making a turn where those kind of individuals are looked at now as the problem. So what's actually happening is that the reality is going to make a switch. Be sure to do everything you can to make sure that this reality makes a switch towards higher levels of spiritual attainment. That's going to end a lot of the disharmony and sadness and disease that's been going on the planet thus far. Again, my name is James Sevan Bomar III. I am your host today, and this is Esoteric Radio. Wholeness and balanced vibration to everyone. Today is May the 29th. You have tuned into the Esoteric Radio show and our segment of the Activated Body Show, which is the ER room for your soul. Today we're going to get into quite a few things. I just wanted to say my co-host is off for today, but we'll be returning in 2 weeks for another Activated Body Show, and of course you can catch up with us next week on my show, which is just the Esoteric Radio show. I also want to let those that are just listeners know that we're available at www.resistance2010.com for all your needs. And so we're going to get right into this today. Today's show is really geared around the connectedness and the different spirits and things that exist on our planetary and universal fields, and how to identify those spirits and where they exist, because we've discovered through a fractal and through fractalization that there's multiple levels of how we're all connected, meaning that if you go inside, you can all there is, or the Most High, or God. But that is not correct. And what we're learning now is how to differentiate as we become more spiritually advanced. We learn how to differentiate one essence from another so that we can choose what type of balance that we want to have that will allow us to be more effective in what we are doing. So I also wanted to talk about basically that the soul, the only differentiation between the soul and the spirit is the soul happens to be in a process where it is in another womb phase, whether it's inside of a body, whether it's inside of a planet, etc., and it's about to learn a lesson. It's a new lesson that it has to learn. While the spirit is already intelligible about not only what the soul would need to learn, but many other things. And so the whole relationship with a soul and a spirit is lessons and abilities and teaching. And this is something that is going on with us as humans. And I will call it, you can find all the planets, you can find all of the beings, you can find many different things, and it is us choosing to amplify that's making that present in our external world. But we are internal and external beings. We have an ebb and a flow, somewhat of a dualistic nature, which allows us to exist in two different worlds, which is personally the dream reality, or as we know it as our meditative states, and the waking reality. So today, what we wanted to talk about is we wanted to talk about the difference between the soul and the spirit. Because from my understanding now, I've seen that when people begin to look into spirituality, they begin to use the same terms. But if you go into the deeper levels of spirituality, we find that there's a separate term for everything. Like looking at Sanskrit, they have a word for every single state that one could enter into. It's not just, or they have different names for different beings. Like we use the term God as a universal term, even though that is particular to one Gothic being, but we use that as a particular term to determine. It would be very difficult to prevent something like that from happening to you unless you gain the knowledge and the accessibility to go into deeper reaches of the earth where light cannot penetrate, or only certain types of light can penetrate. So we understand directly that being on the surface of a planet leaves us extremely exposed to spirits. And so we will go on from there. What literally happens to, in this case, you become the spirit if you're outside of a planet. You're the spirit traveling through the universe, etc., and you're about to make entry. So you become this straight line about to make entry into this orb. But what's most important is the orb that you're about to enter has to make sure that you're compatible with it. So and it takes time to mold you or to heat you up so that you become malleable. Because your beginning state is more like a mineral. Like if you look at many of the stones and rocks that come from space, it's more like a mineral and a metal. It's very cooked and solid. So it's very firm. It knows what it is. But in order to learn the earth lesson more forcefully, like you have to force feed a baby. And to get into that deeper, I'll have to explain first, for many of us that feel like we have an origin out in the cosmos and we may have crash landed on Earth for supplies or something of that nature and then got trapped. Let's just explain exactly what's going on between you coming into a planet like Earth. So generally when a spirit moves in a straight line, we uncovered that in a lot of the ancient texts. It talks about the way spirits move, and they move in a straight line because they're more like rays. They pierce. And so that's what actually gives us the word spiritual. If you look at it, it just says the spear ritual. And what the spiritual or the spear ritual was about is just as we uncovered that you can hook a fish, and spirits are just known as fish, you can also spear a fish. And this is basically when the influence of celestial bodies, stars, rays, lights affect an orb or a soul-type being. It spears right through their orb. So we see right then from that action that